WordPress Basics for MacAdmins. I'm really excited about it. Fun fact, this is not only my first MacAdmins conference, I have not been here for any of the other sessions, so this is my first ever MacAdmins session. So, woohoo, yeah. Housekeeping items, this session is potentially short, so I will be pausing for questions kind of throughout and making sure that you're following along. There'll also be QA time at the end of the session. Also, when I get going, I tend to talk really fast, so you should feel free to yell out, hey, slow down, Bridge, and I will. And finally, an accessibility question. Is there anybody here who has a medical condition that can be triggered by flashing lights or an animated GIF? Good, because my native language is animated GIFs. All right, finally, for those of you who might be wondering why my name sounds familiar, you may already know my husband, who is usually the Bridge speaking at this conference. His name's Tom. So here's a helpful visual guide. I am WordPress Bridge, and he is Wi-Fi Bridge. So there's... Oh, yes, I showed it to him yesterday. And together we have a tiny bridge. Yeah, right? I need to like animate a little heart around it. Okay, so who am I? And why should you listen to me about WordPress? The short version is, this is the 15th anniversary of WordPress. It's been around for 15 years. Version 1 was released in 2003. I started building WordPress sites 14 years ago. George W. Bush won his second term 14 years ago. The Olympics were in Athens. Let's Get It Started by the Black Eyed Peas was the song of the summer. That's how long I've been doing WordPress, and so I've been at this a long time. So that's me, and now for a sense of who's in the room with me, raise your hand if you are a consultant, either on your own or working for an IT consulting firm. Cool. Work at a company where there isn't a dedicated web development resource in-house. Okay, cool. Work at a company where there are dedicated web development resources. That's most of you, great. How many of you use or want to use WordPress in a project outside of your job? Like a personal blog or a volunteer thing? Okay, awesome. And how many of you have no experience with WordPress at all? Sweet, okay. I keep forgetting that I have to trigger the GIF, sorry guys. So our goals today, we are going to understand the basic components of WordPress. We're going to identify emergency troubleshooting techniques. We are going to identify basic preventative maintenance items, and we're going to anticipate future WordPress issues, because there's some stuff coming down the pike preparing to rock people's worlds. All right, so super basic. What is WordPress? It's an open source web content management system. It started out as blogging software, but it's expanded to include other website features, and it is customizable and expandable. It powers 31% of all websites on the internet, but 60% of all websites that use a CMS at all. So it's kind of a big deal. And the best thing about WordPress, since I've been doing this for so long, I feel qualified to say that the best thing about WordPress is that like literally anybody motivated enough can use it to build a really powerful, useful, easy to update website. The worst thing about WordPress is that like anybody can build a website and they can knowing nothing at all about websites. It's a problem, right? So that leads to problems when something breaks and the site owner has no idea how to fix it. If they had a developer, that person is probably long gone, and they never really had much of a plan for what to do if something went wrong. I've picked up a lot of clients that way. I'm kind of like the Winston Wolfe of WordPress. Some of you didn't get that joke, and now I'm old. Ooh, too far. So I also want to get something else clarified right off the bat. There are two different things when we talk about WordPress. WordPress is an open source content management system. You can learn about it at wordpress.org. That's the thing that you can download and install. There is also a WordPress as a service product called wordpress.com. And sometimes they get confused. Oh, my site's on WordPress. Can you fix it? No, I can't, because it's wordpress.com. This is the easiest way to tell which one, when you log in, if you get that top dashboard there, it's probably wordpress.com. If you get that bottom dashboard there, it's probably a self-hosted WordPress. For the purposes of what we're doing today, we're talking about the self-hosted ones because those are the ones that get into trouble. So, what are the components of a WordPress site? There's WordPress core. That's the software that we think of as WordPress. That's the thing that you download and install. It's written in PHP, it's got some jQuery and React components. Then there's the theme. That is the collection of files that renders the front end. WordPress interacts with those to actually render a viewable website. It ships with a bunch of them in the box. There's many more pre-built ones. You can customize them. This is where like the thing that makes your website happen. And then there's a database, usually, almost always, MySQL. And that's what holds all of your settings as well as all of your content, like anything that you would enter into the editor. But there's one more thing about WordPress that we need to talk about. It's plugins, the cause of and solution to almost every WordPress problem. Plugins are just pieces of software that you can use to extend WordPress functionality. There's a little control panel for them. You just press a button to install them. Super easy. They can be very minor. They could be like, it's a custom kind of photo gallery, or a widget that you put in your sidebar. Or it could be an entire platform. It could be like, and here's your shopping cart and store system, or a membership management system, or an entire learning management system. It can make WordPress do things that WordPress was never designed to do, which is awesome and yet also terrible. So your basic, plugins take WordPress from a basic website to a full-powered business platform. The problem is that they're all maintained by the community, which means they can be awesome and have like a real business model behind them, or they can be like some idiot in his basement. And if you don't know how to evaluate a plugin, you don't know what you're installing, it may not get updated, and then you end up not equipped to troubleshoot, and we'll come back to that, because we're going to spend a lot of time talking about that. So, since we're talking about emergency troubleshooting, I want to focus in on the couple of key WordPress files that will be most relevant to the kinds of problems that go wrong. This is what WordPress looks like on your web server. Let's see, most of these files are prefixed for you. You can see they're all labeled WP, whatever. Almost all of WordPress files start that way. Here's where you find your wp-config file. This holds all your basic settings that make your site possible. This is your WP content folder. Everything else that is specific to your site lives in that folder. That's where your themes are. That's where your plugins are. That's where any images that you would upload into your content live in your uploads folder. That's all there in that one. So those files are really important. You want to make sure that they're backed up. So we're going to look a little more closely at wp-config. I've not ever tested this on a screen this big. I have to see how this actually looks. This is where your database settings live. Super important. This is also where your authentication keys are. So you have to keep these very safe. But the good thing to know about this is if somebody comes to you and wants you to fix a WordPress site that you did not build and don't have any knowledge of, this is how you get into the database. It will have the password in it. It has the username in it. It has the host name in it. So good thing to have. Just go straight there to look for that stuff. Yes? Yes, it is in clear text. We're going to talk about that too. But yes, all of that is in clear text. And so we will talk about what you should do to keep that from being. The WordPress installer, when you install it, will like change the permissions on all the files to make it safe, but don't trust just that. We'll talk about that later. So let's talk about the things that you need to fix WordPress. You're going to need your developer tools in Safari or Chrome. That's your element inspector, your JavaScript console. Does anybody not know how to get to those? Okay, so if you can enable the developer menu in Safari, it's all there in the menu. The other way you can do it is if you right-click on any element on the page and click Inspect Element, it'll open up your Inspect Element window, but then you'll have tabs for all of your other development tools. Let's see. You'll need an FTP client. Anybody not familiar with the FTP client? Good. That's what I like about speaking here. You'll need a text editor with syntax highlighting. Personally, I just use Coda to combine those two together, but honestly, whatever you have and are comfortable with will do. It doesn't really matter. You'll need some kind of cPanel or host control panel access so that you can get to the host tools for maintaining a website. You'll need PHP MyAdmin access. Does anybody not know what PHP MyAdmin is? It's just like a web front end for your MySQL database. So instead of like learning SQL commands and inputting them at the terminal, you can actually see the table structure and interact with it that way. It's very handy, especially when you're dealing with a database that you don't know. And finally, you could use the WordPress command line tools. They do exist, but I really would not recommend starting there if you've never dealt with WordPress before. It's easy to break things with them. So, you get a panic call. There's a problem with the site, and all you know about it is that it's on WordPress. Let's talk about the usual suspects. Before I go on, any questions, any other questions? You've been good about asking them. All right, cool. So a common problem is that the site's been hacked. It is in fact quite common, but when I talk to owners about hack prevention, they all say the same thing. What would a hacker want with my site? Well, they want to mine Bitcoin on it. Or they want to make it part of a botnet. Or they want to send spam. Or they want to add a bunch of link spamming crap. So it doesn't matter how big your site is. What they really want is just access to a website on the internet. Because they can put, like I said, browser-based Bitcoin miners, they can use malware, they can make it a bot, part of a botnet. And so you end up with, when you have so many sites running WordPress, it becomes very attractive to hack it and then sort of link them together. Other things that that happen are WordPress is hosted on a server that also contains personal or financial data. And once you're into WordPress, you can get the whole box. So this is kind of a big thing. That actually just happened recently. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Ticketfly, but it's kind of Ticketmaster's main competitor. Their WordPress installation was hacked, and it took down the website because it's a big multi-user installation of WordPress. It took down the website of every one of their clients. It was a big problem. It was a big problem. Oh, come on. There we go. Statistics. How big of a problem is this? According to SiteLock Security, small business websites are attacked 44 times a day. That means while we're sitting here talking about it, someone's trying to hack your website at least twice. Yeah, so think about that. Enjoy that mental image. Somebody's trying to hack your website like right now. 70% of WordPress sites have an exploitable vulnerability. Why do they have an exploitable vulnerability? Because nobody's updating their stuff. 0 days are extremely rare on WordPress. What usually happens is a vulnerability gets found, it gets patched, they're very quick with releasing patches, but then people don't update. And all the tools to exploit a WordPress site are now automated because they download the penetration testing tools that security professionals use. There's one called wp-scan, and you literally just type into the console which website you want to scan, and it presents you with a list of all of the versions and all of the known vulnerabilities. So keep your stuff up to date. How do you know you've been hacked? Well, usually hacks don't usually take the website down. Because if they take the website down, then they don't get their Bitcoin mining, and they don't get their SEO spam, and they don't get to send you, basically you come clean it up. So the way you find out is usually because Google starts throwing warnings whenever somebody visits your site and they call you. Or you start dropping the search rankings and you can't figure out why. It's because suddenly your site is hosting a lot of spam porn links. Let's see. You might find out because your host shuts you down because you're screwing up things up for everybody else. Or suddenly your emails don't go through because your domain's been blacklisted. So how do you get cleaned up? Step 1, you scan for malware. There are a lot of malware scanners on the market. Your host might already have one. You could use isithacked.com, which is just a free service that you can use. There are also several WordPress-specific scanners that can be installed as plugins, but they also have like remote scanning as well, where you just feed in a URL. WordFence is one, Securi is one. You can use those. And then you got to clean it up. If you've got a security plugin, you can clean it up by hand. You can use the plugin to clean it up, or you might be cleaning up by hand. So what you're going to be looking for is figuring out, first you have to figure out which of all those files is infected. It might be a plugin file, it might be a WordPress core file, and then you're going to look for obfuscated code. The core code is usually pretty clean and well commented, so if something doesn't belong there, it'll actually be quite obvious. And it'll also usually be trying to masquerade as something that looks legitimate. Like I was cleaning up hacks a couple months ago where they were trying really hard to convince you that it was Cloudflare code, but like the URL was just that little bit off, like it frequently is. So you have to look for that kind of stuff. You can either do that, you can clean that up directly through the WordPress interface with a text editor and FTP, or in the database you can search and replace.
Is there some kind of version history so you could see files?
Not natively, but there are plugins that will do that will maintain a version history. WordPress does have a version history, but not one that'll let you compare versions, I don't think. But yes, that is frequently a way that you can track it down, because that will also tell you like time and date. Because if the hack was somebody, as happened on a site that I was working with a while ago, somebody just compromised an administrator's password and was just slipping things into entries that were still on the home page. That's a really important thing to know because you want to know how they got in. Or at the end of all this, you could like restore from backup. Do you have backups? You should have backups. Don't count on your host to have your backups for you. Some of them will, but you should always have your own, even if your host is doing it every night. I'm sure I don't need to tell this crowd about the importance of backups, but I will give you Supergirl to tell you about backup anyway. The thing about WordPress, if the core files are damaged, you can always just download another copy of WordPress. And I believe there are also archives of previous versions of WordPress that you can start from as well. So if you are woefully out of date, you could even restore those as well. But you're not going to let your sites get out of date, because that's a terrible idea. All right, and then you're going to lock them out. You're going to change passwords. You're going to password fire drill. And then you're going to rotate your salts. In your wp-config file, they actually give you the address of the salt rotating tool. You just go in and you press a button, and it gives you a bunch of more salts. And you just paste it right back into your wp-config file. Easy enough to do. There's also a plugin called Salt Shaker that'll just rotate them for you every 3 to 6 months. It makes everybody have to log out, but that's fine. But sometimes your site isn't hacked, it's just broken. And it looks like this. We call this the white screen of death. Because it's really scary, because it just doesn't tell you what's wrong, right? Like your site just goes blank. Why is the site down? I don't know. It's just white screening. PHP has run out of memory. You could have a failed update that is just causing some kind of problem. You could have a database error. You could have a theme problem. You just don't know. So first things first, here's how to fix it. First, is WordPress even able to load? When you try to go to wp-admin, which is your admin dashboard, or to the login page, do you even get a login window? If you get a login window, it's probably a theme or plugin problem, probably not a database error. Because then you can at least log into WordPress and use WordPress even if nothing is coming out the other end.
Can you change that path so wp-admin doesn't take you to that?
We're going to get to that. But yes, you can. So what were you doing when the white screen started? What was whoever it was that was working on it doing when the white screen started? Did you just wake up one morning, or was there work in progress? That's a really important question to ask. What happened when the site went down? Because you want to try the easy stuff first. If the site was in the middle of migration, there's a setting in WordPress that tells WordPress what its address is. And if you're moving from, like, for example, a development URL to a production URL, your site will white screen. Fortunately, the fix is easy. You just open up your PHP MyAdmin and go in and fix it. This actually happened to Pam. Yeah, that's what the problem was. The WordPress just didn't know where to find itself anymore, and it just completely crashed, and she had to fix it that way. So that's one of the easy fixes. Were you updating plugins or a theme? Roll it back. Try that. Or if you can't, just start disabling your themes or disabling your plugins one by one until you figure out which one's causing it. And that'll bring your site back. If you get really desperate, if it's a theme problem, I usually keep one of the WordPress default themes on the server just so I can flip over to it if I need to. If you were editing a file, just try undoing whatever you just did. See if that works. If you were cowboy coding directly in the theme editor, first of all, shame on you. I do it all the time, but I shouldn't. You should not do it either. Because there's a theme editor built into WordPress. You could just edit the theme live. Please don't. But if you were cowboy coding, you're going to have to go back and do that manually. And then finally, if there's a caching plugin, try dumping the cache. Sometimes that works too. That's all the easy stuff. If none of that works and your wp-admin looks like this, things get a little more stressful. You don't want to be Ryan Reynolds. Don't be Ryan Reynolds. Okay, so remember these files? Just go ahead and grab yourself a backup of them via FTP. Even if you have a backup already, this is the version of your themes and plugins that exists while the error is going on. So there's only so much help it can be, but it's a good idea to have on hand. Just, download a copy real quick. Then you're going to try enabling debug mode. There's a little setting in wp-config where you just set it from false to true to turn on debug mode, and then suddenly you'll get error messages. Error messages are super helpful. Remember to turn it off when you're done. And then, what do you do with an error message? You know what to do with an error message. You guys are admins. You all know what to do with an error message. I guarantee you someone has seen the error before. The answer will be like on Stack Overflow or wp-beginner.com, or there'll be some like plugin repository help forum thread. Somebody has seen it before. You don't have to figure this out yourself. And if that doesn't work, if you can't Google the error message and find an answer, you're going to have to start, again, disabling plugins or themes one by one by renaming their folders on the server via FTP until your site starts loading, and then you can start re-enabling one by one until you trigger the error again. Super fun, but you know how to do troubleshooting, guys. I don't have to teach you about that. So, when the site's up, but stuff is just broken, it's an on-page error. You've seen this slide before. Try the easy stuff. What were you doing when the error started? I've had errors where like all we did was install SSL, and there was like one reference to jQuery that was still trying to load jQuery over HTTP, and so jQuery wasn't loading, which broke half the site, and literally all I had to do was find that spot in the theme and put the S in, and it fixed the whole site. I've also had issues where when the site was migrated, none of the image references were updated to the new URL. Like all the images were there, but they were all still being called from the dev environment. They separated from the developer deleted the dev environment, suddenly all their images were broken. This is the kind of thing that can happen. So, time to make friends with Safari developer tools. Make sure that you know how to use the element inspector. Make sure you know where your JavaScript console is, because that's what's going to tell you what's not loading over SSL. Make sure they'll also show you errors that aren't obvious. Like, you won't think that error is relevant, but it might be. Some of that you can also get from debug mode, but don't enable debug mode on a production server that's otherwise running. Because you're just gonna, like, I wouldn't do that on production unless it's a white screen situation, because everyone can see your error messages, and that's not cool. So, and this is where some of the hazards of plugins come in, because sometimes a plugin has been abandoned and it's no longer compatible with the version of WordPress you have, especially if it's free and there's no revenue supporting it. Meanwhile, PHP is at end of life, PHP 5 is at end of life, and so plugins are starting to drop support for it, but your website might still be on PHP 5. We're going to get to that too. So a lot of WordPress sites are about to run into problems with that. So, any questions about this so far? Cool. You fixed the problem. You look like a hero. But you obviously don't want to repeat this episode. So how do you keep your WordPress site humming along? You need backups. You need so many backups. Why is my GIF not gifting? It was? Okay, cool. First of all, backups. Do we need to stop the presentation so you can go get backups going? Because it's the most important thing. You should be backing up with your host. You should be backing up separately from your host. There are many, many plugins. They'll back up to Dropbox, Google Drive, Amazon S3. Some of them have their own services. The point is, get you a backup plan. Make sure it's very safe. This is just a handful of the many options you have. These are like kind of the biggest handful. VaultPress is actually run by the WordPress people, but it's not even the most popular. Backup Buddy is very popular. There are lots of ways to do this. So the point isn't to recommend any one in particular. The point is just go find one. Install it, set it up, back it up every night. If the site isn't updated all that often, maybe every night is excessive, but the point is you should have multiple copies of your backups. Then you can think about other stuff. Install a security plugin. They aren't comprehensive, but they're a start. And then once you have if you have a malware scanning plugin, you're going to want a caching plugin, because the scanning plugins bog your site down. Then you're going to want to have a plan for testing and installing updates. Because remember, we talked about your 70% with the vulnerability. You want to be in the 30%. Because it's like when you're out walking in the woods with your buddy and the bear comes after you, you don't have to be fast, you just have to be faster than your buddy. And then there's some WordPress hardening techniques that you can use, like, for example, moving the wp-config that has all of your database information in clear text. And then there's two-factor authentication, which is a good option for some sites. Would have been a good option for Ticketfly. Here, these are the top 3 security plugins. I don't care which one you use. They have advantages and disadvantages. They have different price points. Use one. I will tell you that WordFence has a really good newsletter that whether you use their plugin or not, you should get on it. It's really good. It's very informative. I see you nodding back there. You get it? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the newsletter is really good. I learn all kinds of stuff from it. They've got like a whole blog post on like just penetration testing. Like if you've never done it, here's how you start learning how to penetration test. It's very informative. Caching plugins. There are lots of these options too. With caching in particular, I'd probably go with the more popular ones because they get updated more frequently. I wouldn't go with some like weird no-name caching plugin. But these are a good idea because, like I said, the security plugins can really bog down your site. Speaking of plugins, let's talk about plugin hygiene. I hope you're getting the idea that there's like a million ways to do everything in WordPress. There's always like 5 or 10 plugins that'll do it. But that means that you have to be really careful about what you install. The WordPress plugin repository will give you this block here to tell you about how often the plugin gets updated. Has it been tested with your version of WordPress? How do people rate it? How often do they respond to support tickets? Evaluate this information because you really do not want like a plugin that's like 5 years out of date. It's not being updated anymore. Free can be okay. Free's not great. We're Mac people. We know about total cost of ownership. So I always look for like what's the business model behind this free plugin. Is there a premium version that I could pay for if I chose to? Because what that tells me is that there's somebody whose job it is to update that plugin and keep it running. If there isn't, I have to then, is it like an open source project that there's a lot of people contributing to? Like, evaluate free plugins very carefully. And sometimes it really is worth paying for a license because then the developer will help you if you have problems. That's really valuable. The other thing to know about plugins is that occasionally, and this mostly happens with like the little no-name plugins, but it's happened a few times this year, WordFence sent around emails about it, plugins would get like sold. They'd get acquired by someone else, and that new owner would be unscrupulous and would like literally start loading Bitcoin mining software into the plugin. And so suddenly, like your plugin that you very dutifully updated is now serving malware out of your site. So you got to be careful. It's kind of a jungle out there. Ooh, update on a schedule. Like pick a day, once or twice a month. Update your stuff. The ideal way to update your site is to have a staging site, which is like a copy of your site that's not public. And then update 1 or 2, check to make sure it all still works. Update 1 or 2 more, check to make sure that all still works. That's like the perfect, ideal, responsible way of doing things. The slightly less ideal way of doing it is just to update 1 or 2 at a time on a live site. If they're minor updates, you can usually get away with this. Don't tell anyone I told you could do that, but you could do it. The YOLO way of doing plugin updates is just clicking update all and hoping for the best, walking away. Not least because, first of all, it's a lot of updates all at once, and if there's a problem, you won't know which plugin caused it. But also because if you have like 25 updates, like you can crash your site just from trying to pull down too much content at once. So, but develop a plan. Like I usually do it like 15th and 30th of the month, unless there's some really urgent vulnerability. Okay, so now we're going to talk about hardening WordPress. The wp-config file, it can live up to 1 level above the directory that WordPress is installed in without having to do anything. WordPress can just find it there. So if your WordPress is installed in your web root, you can just move it up 1 level above your web root, and then it's not in a public folder anywhere. And then make sure you set your permissions. If you move it up more than 1 level, you can do that, but then you have to make like a placeholder wp-config that points to the real one, which is fine. It's a couple lines of code, and there are Google tutorials for that. I'm not going to get into all that here. But yes, you can move your wp-config, and you should, because it has the literal keys to the kingdom in it. You can also use htaccess to deny access to a couple of folders that for whatever reason WordPress itself does not protect natively. You could use a plugin to move the location of your login and wp-admin pages. A lot of people do that. A lot of the WordPress scanners that exist start by looking for, is wp-admin even where I expect it to be? And finally, you could also make sure that all of your users have nicknames set, and then only the nicknames are displayed. Like, you know how in a blog it'll say, this entry is by so-and-so? Make sure it's using their name and not their username. because what you should be doing is using usernames that are not super common. Like I always append like a string on the end of mine. So make sure you're just using like Joe Smith instead of whatever his username is. And then two-factor. Let's talk about two-factor for a second. Because the thing about two-factor is, as you probably know, inevitably, whoever, like some like super important user is going to lose access to their second factor, right? They're going to lose their UB key. They're going to forget their phone at home one day and not be able to use their Google Authenticator, and then they're not going to be able to work. And so it can be sort of debatable how valuable two-factor is versus the risk of having to deal with like that forgetful user. However, if your server has, or your site has personal data like PII, any kind of financial data, anything that would be like a real anything that would be of high value for a hacking target, two-factor, at least for your administrators. Because hackers really like to compromise administrator accounts, because once you're an administrator, you can edit the theme files, you can upload payloads, you can like, I mean, you can, with like an editor, with like an author account, less so, but with an administrator account, you could probably compromise the entire server that the site is on. Two-factor, decide what your second factor is going to be, find a plugin that supports it, install it. There are many two-factor plugins. They all support different combinations of whatever it is. Just find one, use it. You know, I mean, Duo's good. There's lots that support Google. There's Mini Orange. There's lots. All right. Are you with me so far? Questions? I thought I saw a hand. I could throw you the microphone. You could throw her the microphone. Abby? I don't know if we actually turned that microphone on.
I turned it back
Right,
on.
fantastic. I don't see anybody up. No. You have to, I'll repeat her question.
Speaking of weird ways in which a WordPress site can error out, I'm just wondering if you've ever seen people be completely unable to log in on Safari, because that's what we currently are dealing with. And you can log in Chrome, you can log in Firefox. I don't think I've ever had anybody try to log in through IE, thank God. But Safari will routinely either throw no error message or throw a cookies are not enabled error message.
I've never seen that, but I would probably have a really good time figuring out what's wrong. Like that sounds like now I'm really.
And like I've tried Googling around for it and not seen anybody mention it, so I'm trying to figure out if we're just really weird in our implementation instance, or if this is actually a common thing.
I mean, having not seen it, I can't tell you that you're not really weird. You could be really weird, or it could be like an issue of how your Safari is configured.
Safari is the only web browser out there that doesn't accept third-party cookies.
Yeah, and not only like what kind of SSL you're using, and I mean, it could be like an SSL error, like it could be any number of things. And without having, like, I would want to get in and dig in and look around, but that sounds super interesting, and we should talk later.
Incognito mode?
I think we tried that, and I think it didn't work. And it's across multiple machines, multiple versions of IE. This has been going on for like 4 years, and never worked.
That's super interesting.
Weirdest thing ever.
Huh, okay. No, that's actually more information, though, because if we're talking about a version of WordPress that's 4 years old, the other thing about the salts that I forgot to mention is wp-config doesn't change from as you update WordPress, and so you're still using the salts from 4 years ago if they've never been rotated. And I don't know if that would necessarily cause anything, but it couldn't hurt to try, right? So that's like, that would probably be the first thing I would do. But we should talk about that later, because that's a super interesting problem, and now I'm intrigued. I have a puzzle. So now we're going to talk about choosing a host for your WordPress site. Please don't use like $5 cheap shared hosting for WordPress. Just don't do it. It's not good for you. It's not good for me. It's not good for anybody. A specialist WordPress host is going to offer a few things that make managing WordPress a lot easier. Nightly backups and restore points on the fly. Yes, you should still be taking your own, but if they have backup tools built in and restore points on the fly, if you run into a situation where you want to restore, it's very easy. It's already integrated. You don't have to do. There's a lot of work that you don't have to do. One-click staging. I feel like one-click staging should be included in the cost of your hosting. Not everybody includes this, but this is like you get a button in your WordPress where you click it and it just creates another version of your site to sandbox on. I think everyone should have this because you always want to like test out edits to your theme and test out your updates and things like that. And I think a specialist WordPress host should provide this at no extra cost, though they don't all. Automatic core updates. Unless you have something super duper custom, in which case you probably have a team of people on top of this for you already, you should at least be able to get the point updates of WordPress automatically, because that's where your security content's going to be. And like we're at WordPress 4.9.7 right now, so like that 0.7, like that's usually a vulnerability has been discovered. They've issued a patch. You should be installing those quickly, because then otherwise you could go from being in the 30% to being in the 70%. Let's Encrypt SSL support should be included. Some hosts don't do this, GoDaddy, because they want to protect their SSL revenue that they charge you for. But I also feel like in the year of our Lord 2018, you should not have to pay extra for SSL unless you're doing e-commerce. Let's Encrypt is good enough for almost everybody. You should have it built in. I don't understand why they won't do it. Well, I do understand. Go ahead.
Is Let's Encrypt the service that you renew your certificate every 30 days?
Yeah, it's like every 90 days now, but usually when they build in that support, I'm sorry, I didn't even tell you what Let's Encrypt is. Let's Encrypt is a kind of a community certificate authority, free SSL certificates, as many as you need, as often as you need them. They ask that you update them they require that you update them every 90 days, but a host with support for that built in, they have that script already built in to do that for you, so it's not like you have to set like an Outlook reminder to go back and do it. It just gets done for you. And that's what I mean by Let's Encrypt support. GoDaddy, you could use like a Let's Encrypt certificate, but then you are going to be the one setting up all of the renewal stuff. And I don't think anybody should have to do that. Hosts should be making that as easy as possible, which is why I never recommend GoDaddy, because I'm mad at them about this. But that's the value of Let's Encrypt SSL support. As a bonus, ideally, a specialist WordPress host will offer you automated migration tools. Like WP Engine has a plugin that you put into your old site, and then you connect it to your new WP Engine account, and it just slurps everything up and moves it for you. I wouldn't choose a host just for that, because theoretically you're only going to use it the one time, but it's nice to have. It takes a lot of the hassle out. But meanwhile, so okay, are we with me on hosts so far? There are lots of like WP Engine, SiteGround, all good choices. DreamHost has a specialist product. There are lots of them. So now we're going to talk about upcoming emergencies. There's a few things coming down the pike this year that are going to break sites. And only one of them is something that WordPress is doing. And I'm anticipating getting a lot of calls from clients about these things, and I'm trying to get ahead of it. At the end of this month, Chrome is going to start marking every site that doesn't use SSL as not secure. People are going to freak out when they realize that all those times that I warned them about SSL, they should have read my email. So that's going to be a problem for people. Yes, you fools. Well, the thing is, like, SSL is free. There's no reason not to do it. Like, for my clients, the only charge that I make is, like, for my actual time setting it up. The solution is just install some SSL. You won't have this problem. Now, this does take a little bit of time because, for example, it changes the address of your site, which can white screen you because suddenly WordPress doesn't know where it is and you have to go into the database and update it. You also need to go back through your database and like do a search and replace of all of your internal links and things like that. That's okay. You can do that. It doesn't take. There's even a plugin. You don't even need PHP MyAdmin. There's a plugin that does search and replace on your database. There's also the command line tools. The command line tools do that too. So just, you have to make sure your theme only references assets over HTTPS, because otherwise, like, jQuery won't load and suddenly your site's broken again. Okay, so here's the next thing. August 2018, they're saying, the new WordPress editor is going to roll out. They're calling it Gutenberg. Here's the thing about the current WordPress editor. It's been almost exactly the same for 15 years. It's just a text box with the title. And some metadata fields. But in 15 years, like, what people expect out of websites and what people expect out of their web editing experience has changed quite a bit. People want more complex layout options, and so this like complicated system of like short codes and page builders, like there's whole plugins that will just like layer a page builder over top of WordPress for you, so you can like have like a WYSIWYG page editor. All of this stuff has grown up around WordPress to try and fix the deficiencies in the editor. Now, I am old school and I learned to build websites on GeoCities, so I like the old editor, but most people do not. And so, like, site builders like Wix and Squarespace have become more popular. WordPress looked around and said, you know, we need to do something about this. And so they have started developing their own sort of blocks-based editor. They're calling it Gutenberg, as in the guy who invented the printing press, because that's how big of a deal this is. This is what the WordPress editor looks like right now. I took this screenshot like last night on my site. Now this is the contact page from my website. You can see that there's a shortcode there where the form should be, because there's not a form editor built into the WordPress editor. So that's the editing experience we have right now. It is very, very text-based. And by the way, this is what the WordPress editor looked like 11 years ago. You can see that only the Chrome really has changed. And it looked pretty much like that when I started. We just didn't have the buttons then. We didn't have the formatting buttons. You had to do it in HTML, as God intended. Get off my lawn. This is what the new editor looks like. This is Gutenberg. And it's kind of nice. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I think this is going to help people a lot. Basically, if you look at this interface, the image is its own block. The paragraph is a block. And they all get their own little editing tools so you can format them. You can drop in pull quotes. You can drop in like video embeds. You can really have, like, this is a really much more layout-oriented editor. So you can do like magazine-style layouts directly in the editor. It's going to make a huge difference to people. But there are 15 years of habits, products, workflows, business models, all built around WordPress not having this. So it's gonna move some cheese. Yes.
So documents that use like open XML, like a Word document, formatted just so. Can you click and drag?
You know, I haven't tried that. I don't think that's gonna roll out with Gutenberg at launch. Like, I don't think, right now they're kind of working on shipping Gutenberg as like a minimum viable product. So maybe you'll get that later, but I don't know that you'll get it in August. I don't know about that. Yeah. I think I wouldn't expect it there, but I would expect it in the future.
Do we know yet how this is going to break or not break, but probably break existing plugins?
Yes,
that
we do.
Play with formatting?
That's my next slide. So here's the thing. Gutenberg is kind of a developing situation. I added these slides on Sunday because I got an email about the Gutenberg launch timeline. It's happening in a few weeks. Like, this is any page builders that bypass the editor entirely, they're gonna continue to work for the time being. Any plugins like Visual Composer that work directly in the visual editor, those are gonna break. And for a while, there's gonna be a transition period where you still have access to the classic editor. But eventually, they're going to take the tiny MCE, like text box editor, out of it entirely, and then you will have to reinstall it as a plugin if you want it that badly. Also, there are like custom post types and stuff. Like, they have to be, for right now, they have to like affirmatively support the new editor. But before long, the system is going to start assuming that they do. Like, eventually, they're gonna try to move people along pretty quickly on this. So what I'm recommending that people do is, here we go. Get your staging site. If your one is not included with your host, make one. You can install Gutenberg as a plugin right now. Start testing. It's there. It's most of the way done. Just start testing. See what happens. See if it breaks. But pay particular attention to anything that augments the native editor. A lot of WordPress sites, a lot of WordPress themes that came from like ThemeForest, came with something called Visual Composer by a company that at the time was called WP Bakery. I hate this page builder. First of all, it's just a terrible product, but it's very popular. A lot of themes bundled it. So there are a lot of sites built on it. Those guys do not have a solution for you. Their solution was, well, you can pay to upgrade to our page builder that bypasses the editor entirely, but we don't really have any way for you to migrate your content. Like, these guys are so screwed, and they don't even, like, they know how screwed they are, and they're hoping you don't notice. But if, like, your Beaver builders, your Divi, your Elementor, like, those are probably going to be okay, at least for the time being. There will be more time to figure that out with them. And then, if you really need the classic editor for something, install the plugin just so it'll be there when that eventually comes, because I don't know how fast they're going to do that, how fast they're going to take it out of core. So the third thing, in December 2018, PHP 5 is going really for real, we mean it this time, out of support. They've extended support for it twice already because like every freaking web host in the world has been pushing people onto PHP 5. Oh, it's more stable. You know why it's more stable? Because they're not updating it anymore. It's easy to be stable when you don't get any updates. But PHP 5 support is officially going to end. Please get off PHP 5. Please. PHP 7 is so much faster. But you got to start testing. WP Engine, which is one of the specialty WordPress hosts, has developed a plugin. Anyone can use it. You can install it directly from the WordPress dashboard, called plugin PHP Compatibility Checker. And what it does is it just scans all of your plugin and theme code and looks for functions that are deprecated in PHP 7. It's not a complete, perfect solution, but it's a really good start. Then, if you have the staging server and you can run your staging environment on a different version of PHP, update your staging server. See what happens. Find out. Or if you really can't do that, you can use a local staging environment to test. There are lots of tools that'll do this. Local by Flywheel comes to mind, but there are a couple that will let you just set up WordPress like on your Mac and test it that way. But I do recommend doing that because you don't have much longer on PHP 5 before they just stop updating it. They're not going to update any more patches because they are tired of that nonsense. So, you're listening to all this, and some of you are like, my eyes are glazing over. This all sounds like so much hassle. Maybe I should just do Squarespace. Okay, this is not your area. Sounds like a lot of work. It is, but there are ways to outsource it. If you're on a specialist host, their tech support's going to be pretty good, and they'll keep track of a lot of this stuff for you, a lot of the updates and things like that. And they'll send you handy little bulletins. There'll be less help with plugins, but they'll be pretty good on WordPress core and keeping things up to date. And like security, like a lot of them don't even allow you to use the security scanner plugins or caching plugins because their servers are already configured to handle that for you. There are also maintenance companies like WP Buffs, GoWP, that are basically just giant outsource help desks for WordPress issues. You get an email address to send to, and they reply to you, and they keep your stuff up to date. They're pretty good and economical. Like, you can do that for as little as $40 a month. What they will not do is, like, get to know you and your business and your, and, like, your needs. They're not going to help you plan for the future, how to get the most out of your website. For that, you're going to need WordPress consultants, like yours truly. That's the only sales pitch in the entire presentation. To help you, because they will take that on for a fee, and then they'll actually like get to know you, and you'll have their phone number and be able to call them and all that kind of stuff. So, questions, general questions. Is your WordPress site broken? That's all right.
Is WordPress really well known for its accessibility features? Like, can the blind navigate the website? And
you know, I'm not the right person to ask about that.
there are
I know
certain
people who
standards
are.
that should be met that I don't know if WordPress meets.
Well, I think a lot of accessibility is going to be based on the theme rather than WordPress itself. I think that's where most of the accessibility issues are going to come in for you. There is a big WordPress accessibility community, but I don't know how much, like I'm not familiar enough with those standards to be able to tell you authoritatively, like WordPress is definitely the system you want to use for that. But there are a lot of communities around that. A thing that I do know, though, is that as an open source community and as a company, Automatic, they are really concerned about like accessibility of WordCamps. WordCamp is like the conferences for WordPress users. And so like it's a rule that if you're hosting a WordCamp, because these are community-run events, if you're hosting a WordCamp, all of your sessions have to be live captioned, for example. So you go to WordPress and there's like a guy with like a stenography keyboard in the corner who specializes in technology language and a giant screen above his head, and he's captioning the speaker live. And then those captions then get piped into the video feeds because all of the feeds are archived and kept centrally. So it's something that's important to the community, but it seems like more of an issue for theme development than WordPress itself. Other questions? Stump the WordPress monkey. Pam. Toss her the, I mean, the box is so cool that we should use it. Uh-oh. Did you break it?
I might break it. So can you, I don't know if you're set up to do this. Can you go through PHP MyAdmin so we can see what it is? Any of the times that I've tried to install it, I want to slash my wrists.
So here's the thing about PHP. I've never installed it.
Oh, sure.
No, because it usually comes with your
Because you use a
hosting.
hosting service.
You know what I
but
mean?
For
Like, it
those of
comes
us
with your-
who want to host maybe locally,
But if you're
or,
hosting locally,
or want to look at what we've got,
right?
I know the problem we had was like, we'll go into PHP MyAdmin. Well, I didn't have it. It never came up. I can't remember how we actually ended up getting to it,
Okay.
which is obviously part of the problem.
Let me think about. I'd have to because I'm not plugged into the Ethernet right now. I don't have the adapter for it. But yeah, usually that would be in your host control panel and that sort of thing.
Right.
How about?
Do you have access to any of them that you can run through?
Let me think about that.
If not, that's cool.
I don't know.
That's a session for next year. Then.
Yeah, let me try that. Let's convene after the fact on that because I do have access to that, but it's their client PHP
Right.
MyAdmin, and I don't want to put him on the I don't want to put him on the recording. So let's not do that right now. But we can do that. We can lobby track it. Yes. Toss the.
Is there ever such a thing as too many plugins to be running on
Yes.
a site? Okay. Is there?
I mean, there's not like a hard number.
Okay.
But it's because WordPress. I mean, I'm managing a site right now. I didn't build it this way, but it has like 39 plugins on it, which to me just seems like an excessive number. The thing about plugins is that they're not all optimized equally and things like that. That can be a real drag on performance for your website. And every plugin is a potential vector of attack. So I try to keep it super tight and deactivate things I'm not using because then they don't show up in the scan, stuff like that. But I mean, there's not like a hard and fast number. It's more like, well, when your site stops working that well, you have too many. It's more of an art than a science. It's kind of that, is there a business model behind it? Who's writing it? How often does it get updated? You kind of have to feel it out a little bit, and it's never really, I mean, there are some that I'm very confident in. There's a company called The Modern Tribe that does a very well-known calendar plugin called the Events Calendar. I feel really good about that. It's a whole company. What they do is WordPress plugins. And since they charge a fair amount of money for them, there's a revenue model, and I feel good about their plugins. There's also stuff that everybody uses until one day it just stops getting updated, like the Markdown editor for WordPress. They stopped updating that because it got built into Jetpack, which is, it got built into Jetpack, so they stopped updating it, couldn't use it anymore. Other questions? We could talk about plugins all day.
Can plugins be notorious for interfering with other plugins?
Oh, that's a huge problem, especially when you get plugins that don't like enqueue their scripts properly and stuff. Plugins absolutely can have conflicts, especially when you have plugins that have like functionality that bumps up that's kind of adjacent. You're raising your hand again.
Am I wrong? Even if they're deactivated, they can also cause potential issues with performance or other potential
I mean, if they're
plugins?
deactivated, WordPress won't be loading them.
Okay.
So they wouldn't cause a performance issue. Okay. There's still files sitting on your server that are potentially vulnerable, but they're harder to find through the automated means. Okay. Like if it was something super, there is a plugin out there called Advanced WordPress Reset, and literally what it does is it resets your WordPress database to factory. That's useful in a development environment. I would delete that immediately from production. You know what I mean? Because if it's there, anybody who does get into your site can just reactivate it. So like anything that's being cautious about what the plugin actually does, even if I think I might use it again, I might delete it just to keep it off the server. And if it's not something where I need to like keep a settings file for it. So I try to remove things as much as possible as soon as they become obsolete. Other questions? Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
I first started setting up WordPress, and I had the one screen of death. It took me 2 weeks to figure out because PHP libraries had not added in. Very frustrating.
It is very frustrating.
5 minutes to get set up, it was not 5 minutes.
Right, yeah. Yeah, so WordPress prides itself on like the 5-minute installation, but it's only a 5-minute installation if the server has everything it needs. And so when you are choosing was that a local installation or was that on a host? Yeah, on a local installation that can be, because the only person in charge of installing that stuff is you, which is why I actually suggest not doing local until you're a little more familiar with WordPress. I tell people not to use cheap shared hosting, and you shouldn't for anything that's real. But as a sandbox to just learn WordPress for the first time, it's pretty good because all of that stuff will already be there.
We're replacing the Apple server at
Mhm.
the wiki
Mhm.
trying to use WordPress.
Mhm.
And one of the features that we had, and I was really surprised it didn't seem to be built
Mhm.
into at least tiny MCE, was the ability to put a table inline
Mm.
and have information. So we have a server with a set of IPs. I can list the server
Mhm.
and the IP next to it very easily. I ended up doing a plugin to make
Mhm.
it work. Is that something that
I mean, the thing about tables is because they're not responsive, a lot of the trend in web development right now is just to avoid using them whenever possible, unless, though, what you're describing is like the one use case where people still say, oh yeah, you should use a table. But I think the assumption has typically been, and I don't think it's a fair assumption, it's typically been that if you actually need to use a table, you probably know how to just write one in HTML. Because like I've never used a plugin to do that because I would just write it in HTML. So, but yeah, there are plugins that'll do that. AD binding like in WordPress? Speak into the microphone. So like Active Directory binding? There are plugins that'll do that too. Like there are plugins for WordPress for like SAML, for all kinds of like authentication stuff.
Hello?
Yeah, you might have to get up close to the box. So there are plugins that'll do that kind of work. I have never done it personally, but it's doable, sure. Anybody else? We're troubleshooting the catch box. Anybody else? Okay. So this is where to find me. I hang out in the MacAdmins Slack in the WordPress channel. You can always find me there, unless I'm on vacation. My Twitter name is actually just Tiffany. I've been on Twitter that long. I beat both the pop star and the jewelry store, but I get their tweets all the time. It's my work email, my LinkedIn. Please do find me there. I'm happy to talk to you, and I'll be like lobbyconning, and I'm only here today for one more session. I'm driving back to DC tonight, but would love to like play Stump the WordPress Chump with you, if at all possible. Thank you very much.